Hey, this is Darren from Property Prosperity. Today I thought I'd like to have a bit of a chat to you about beliefs. And the reason why I think that's important is, well, let me go back a step. I suppose I'll just give you I was listening to radio once and they were talking about a study they did into people's beliefs. And they actually found that if someone believes something, the more you try to prove them wrong, the more likely they are to believe it. So they gave the example of the Iraq War when when they invaded Iraq because they thought they had weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons and nuclear weapons or whatever they had at the time. And so they went back after that, and obviously they found that there was no chemical weapons and no nuclear weapons, and essentially it was sort of flawed, the reason they went there in the first place. Thanks for the like, appreciate that. Hey Brett, thanks for joining. And so the reason they went there was flawed essentially in the first place. So they went in there, they sent a whole pile of people there, they found there was nothing there, and they said basically, well, we've made a mistake. So then they actually went and did a big study a few years later, after it had been categorically proven that there were no weapons of mass destruction. And they interviewed a whole pile of people and they asked them whether they believed there were weapons of mass destruction there. And so there's a good percentage of the population, this was in America, a good percentage of that population said, yep, there were definitely weapons of mass destruction there. And they said, hey, did you watch all the stuff? And did you see that they had sent people in there, they couldn't find weapons of mass destruction? And essentially, majority, if not all of the people that believed before the Iraq War that there were weapons of mass destruction, after they'd categorically proven there wasn't weapons of mass destruction, they still believed it. And to a degree, in the sense that they actually believed it more after it had been proven that that wasn't true than before. So, which is a really interesting thing. And I suppose it's a thing of human nature. And if you look at things like, the whole climate change thing, they talk about climate skeptics. If you talk to any scientist, it's almost beyond doubt. And it's got to the point now where they don't even talk about in the scientific community whether it's happening or whether it's not happening, because it's accepted that it basically is. And yet there's a core minority of the population that are determined or totally believe that there's that man-made climate change is non-existent, and they believe it's a conspiracy essentially. And the thing is, it doesn't matter how much study and how much research and how much time is spent trying to prove these people wrong, they're not going to believe it, because it's a human quality is, if you believe something to be true, then doesn't matter who tries to convince you otherwise, it's, as far as you're concerned, it's true. So the reason why that's important as far as the world of property goes, if you're looking at setting yourself up a property portfolio, or you're looking at, you see when you're looking around, hey, Asley, thanks for joining. When you're around, people, you're driving along the street, you see someone knock down a house and subdivide and build 2 houses there, and they sell it off, and you think, man, they must have made a lot of money on that. Or you see someone doing a renovation, it might be a family friend, or it might be someone hey, Debbie, thanks for joining. And you see what they're doing, you're like, wow, look at all the money they're making. For some reason, it's, you can see it in front of you that it's a possibility and there's an option, and yet you can't believe it's true. For some reason, you can see that these other people are achieving, success, but for some reason you think, well, that's fine for them, but it doesn't apply to me. And I suppose quite often, to be honest, a lot of the people you see on TV or you go to seminars and a whole pile of different things, they're usually somewhere else. And that usually reinforces that perception that, hey, it can't happen here. It can't happen in Adelaide or wherever you happen to be. It always has to happen somewhere else. So quite often you go to a seminar and, there's someone comes from Perth, or someone's from Melbourne, or someone's from America, or wherever they happen to be, or you're watching something on the internet. And quite often you sort of think that person's somewhere else, and it doesn't really apply to Adelaide, or it doesn't apply to my suburb, or it doesn't apply to my situation, or it doesn't apply to the amount of time I've got, or my education level, or the amount of money I've got. And there's always reason why their situation doesn't apply to you. And what that does, it reinforces your belief that it's not possible for you, and it's only possible for somebody else. So that's why it's really important to, consider that when you're making decisions and deciding whether really it is something that's fact, or whether it's something you just believe to be true. And in actual fact, the more you believe it, the more it's actually going to become fact for you. So why that's important is maybe you find you're actually limiting yourself because of purely your beliefs. And if you actually question that, or even don't even try and question it, because that's why one of the things about it is, if people try and prove you wrong, or if you try and prove yourself wrong, you end up believing it more. So maybe what you should do, rather than trying to believe it or not believe it, if you can see and if you can model yourself on somebody else has been successful, then basically just do what they've done, regardless of whether you believe it or not. If they've been successful doing it, then just push your way through and just ignore what you think at the end of the day. Just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, modeling yourself on other people. And one day you're either gonna fail or you're gonna succeed. Yeah, and at least you've known you've given it a chance, rather than purely relying your expectations or your thoughts. Hey Chris, thanks for joining. Rather than deciding not to do anything because you don't think it's possible for you. So why this is also important when you're considering other people's opinions is quite often people are going to, if you've got a plan or a goal, and if you communicate to other people, they tell you why you can't do it or even why you can do it. And so sometimes, you've really got to wonder what their agenda is, I suppose. The thing to understand is everyone has an agenda, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It might be a family member that's giving you advice, telling you not to do something because they care about you and they don't want you to make mistakes, and they don't want you to risk, everything you work so hard for, in the fact they don't want you to be in trouble. Or they might be talking to your builder and they, obviously their advice might be to build a house because that's all they do. Or your mortgage broker, and he might say, hey, you should refinance and spend some more money because that's all their job is essentially. So you've always got this situation where you're getting advice from other people. There's potential they might have other agendas, or they might have beliefs, just like I suggested with you. You may have a belief that you hold to be true, and regardless of what the actual facts are, you still believe it to be true regardless. And so you've got to be wary of that when you're dealing with other people. Is just because they believe it's true doesn't mean it's actually true. And so the danger with this, and particularly in the fact of, you're getting advice, you're thinking about subdividing, or you're thinking about selling your house, you're thinking about doing something with property, quite often you'll find someone trying to talk you out of it, or trying to, just give you advice, I suppose, and with all the best intentions. But sometimes what that can do, even if you have all the facts and figures and you've done all the research yourself, it can make you doubt yourself. And the problem with that, particularly with property, it can be a process. It can be a project involved in doing a subdivision or a renovation, or even just selling a house can take several months to get to that point to achieve what you're trying to achieve. With most things with property, you get the benefit by getting to the end. If you get stuck halfway through, you decide it's all too much, or you get stressed, or you can't sleep at night and all that sort of stuff, and you decide you just have to sell in a hurry because the stress is too much, generally you're going to be worse off than if you've done nothing at all. So the important thing with property is to make sure you can get to the end. Part of that is to do all your research, get all the details, get all the facts and figures up front. When I'm doing an analysis for a client, whether they should do a subdivision or not, I might do a couple of 100 pages of information to go through just to make sure we've covered every possible scenario. Partly that's to make sure that we've covered everything, so there's going to be no surprises and we don't get in trouble halfway through, and so we can make sure we get to the end. But also a very important part of that is just to give my clients a lot of confidence that we've done all the research and we've got all the information and there's going to be no surprises. So, it's the sleep at night factor, that I know basically if they can't get to the end, they're not going to get the benefit. So I've got to make sure they can get to the end. And by doing all this thorough research and investigation, I know they're more likely to get to the end. And likewise, when they go to that next barbecue and Uncle Jim's there giving advice, saying, oh, no, you can fit 10 houses on this block, or, oh, no, you can only, my friend did this down the road and they got in lots of trouble and they lost all their money and they, broke up their marriage and a whole pile of different things. So, it can really make you doubt yourself, even if they're being positive or they're being negative, by questioning your own logic and understanding. You can sort of doubt yourself and you're not really sure whether you're going to make it to the end. And sometimes you don't make it to the end because, again, the belief thing, if you're not sure you're going to make it to the end, then quite often you're not going to make it to the end. So you've got to believe from the very start you're going to make it all the way to the end. You've got to believe you've got all the information you need. And so then when Uncle Jim gives you some advice, you can say, hey, Uncle Jim, thanks very much for the advice. I really appreciate it. And then you can just choose to ignore it and just continue on as if you were before, basically. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you understand why your beliefs are really important, and how other people's beliefs are really important, how they can really affect your success. And hopefully then you can not necessarily question your own beliefs, but at least put them in place with other important facts as well, to consider whether it's really that important, whether you believe. Because sometimes if you believe you're going to succeed, you are, and sometimes whether you believe you're not going to succeed, then you're going to do that as well. So essentially, if you just bring in facts and logic, you can disregard your beliefs and just push your way through. And sometimes it is going to be difficult to ignore your own beliefs, but sometimes that's the best thing for you. And just get advice from someone that's done it before, that they've actually, rather than Uncle Jim that's never done a development before, or someone that's giving you advice on selling a house where they've only sold one house before. Get some advice from someone that's done it lots of times before. I'm not talking like once or twice. I'm talking about hundreds of times. And then you can really, if they've done it that many times, you can maybe, start to take their advice. You've really got to value people's advice. You got to determine which is the most valuable advice to take on board. So hopefully that's made sense to you, and hopefully, don't necessarily question your beliefs, but at least understand, there is a role for your beliefs, and sometimes there's a time that you may want to choose to disregard it and push on through regardless. So if you like what I had to say, then click on the like button. If you haven't liked it, still click on the like button, because I'd really appreciate it. And thanks for joining me. And if you've got a comment, if you've got a situation where you've just pushed on through, regardless of whether you thought you were going to make it or not to the end, and you may have had doubters there questioning whether it was the right thing to do, but you've just kept going and you've managed to succeed, then I'd love to hear about it. And if you've got a situation where you'd like me to chat about something else in a future episode, then I'm happy to chat about it. I look forward to it. And I'll chat to you again next time. Thanks, guys. See you next time.